Camera speed.
Sound production, take one.
Action!
Welcome to From Beneath the Hollywood Sign. If you love old movies, Hollywood history, or the golden age of filmmaking, you've come to the right place. This is the podcast that talks about amazing stories of Tinseltown from another era. Hear fascinating conversations with writer-producer Steve Cubine, who quite literally lives just beneath the Hollywood sign, and actress-writer Nan McNamara. Now your hosts, Steve and Nan.
It's taken us a couple of weeks to recuperate from the Turner Classic Movie Film Festival, right?
It has. Nan and I were so fortunate to be able to cover the Turner Classic Festival as part of From Beneath the Hollywood Sign. So we got to go and participate, see some incredible movies. It was such an honor and such a privilege. And I have to say, the people at TCM, you guys run a tight ship.
They really do.
Yeah, it was so well organized and so well put together. It was so thoughtful.
Yeah.
That I was, as a first timer there, so impressed.
And an amazingly curated group of films. What were some of your favorites? We can't talk about them all, but what were your top takeaways?
Well, people who know me know I love film noir. Mm-hmm. And I was able to see 3 of maybe my top 5 film noirs on the big screen at this festival. So I'm grateful for that.
Yes.
I got to see The Big Heat, of course, Glenn Ford, Gloria Graham. I also got to see The Asphalt Jungle, which
That's maybe your favorite film, right?
Yeah,
one of your favorites.
I think The Big Heat and Asphalt Jungle are 2 of my favorites. But of course, Asphalt Jungle is Sterling Hayden and Gene Hagen. Incredible film. Seeing that on the big screen was amazing. And I also got to see White Heat.
Oh, yes.
Which I love Jimmy Cagney.
Yes.
So seeing those masterpieces on the big screen to me was quite a thrill.
Yeah, it really does make a difference.
I know. And what was the movie that you were most excited to see?
The one I was most excited was actually on our preview list. We both had wanted to see The Good Fairy, 1935, William Wyler. It completely lived up to all my expectations. I think we both were surprised at how good it was.
It was just magical. And I was so surprised that I had never had I seen this movie, I've never heard of it.
I had never
So it was
either.
such an undiscovered gem for me.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that you had never heard of it made me feel a little better. Of course, it's with Margaret Sullivan, Herbert Marshall, and his beard as the lovely TCM host introduced it. And we got to hear William Wyler's son, David Wyler, introduce the film. And that was a thrill to get to hear him talk about his father. And he clarified the fact that he was not married to Margaret Sullivan during the filming of that they got married after that. They fought during The Good Fairy all the time, his father said.
Yes, which I love knowing the timeline of that.
Yeah.
So now we know.
Yeah, exactly. The other thing that was really thrilling was getting to see Diane Lane interviewed by Ben Mankiewicz about A Little Romance and just about her career.
Oh, I love her.
Yeah, that could have been a whole hour right there just talking to her. She's such a fabulous actress.
Yeah, well, kind of on those same lines is I loved hearing Dana Delaney introduce The Big Heat because Dana Delaney is a fanatical fan of Gloria Graham.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
She's written about her for Eddie Muller's magazine, for Noir City.
Okay.
So she's kind of an aficionado about Gloria Graham, and she gave the most incredible intro to that movie, particularly about Gloria and her impact on film.
Yeah. Well, the 4 days flew by, and I don't know about you, but I can't wait until next year.
I cannot wait. Such a blast. And thank you, TCM. We loved being there. For me, Nan, growing up, watching old movies like I did, one of my favorite things was the opening. Seeing the Hollywood studio logo appear.
Yes, and the music.
Yeah, but MGM had its lion, Paramount had its mountain with the stars, RKO had the great radio towers, 20th Century Fox had the klieg lights searching. But I was obsessed with the Columbia Pictures Torch Lady.
Oh.
Because I thought she was so beautiful and regal and elegant. And I just loved her standing there in the toga, holding the light, like the Statue of Liberty.
Yes.
I'm always been curious about how did that come to be? And how did a lot of these iconic logos come to be? And that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about the mystery behind the Columbia Pictures Torch Lady.
Yep.
And we're also going to talk about the story story of Leo the Lion from MGM.
Yes. It was new to me that Columbia Pictures, which began in 1919, started, as you say, a less than catchy name, Cone Brandt Cone Film Sales was how it started.
Now, there's a ringer.
Yeah, right. That just trips right off my tongue.
Yes.
So their logo was also less than impressive, and you'll be able to see that if you watch our YouTube channel or go to Steve's blog. But yeah, it's not very inspiring. But in 1924, the studio changes its name to Columbia Pictures.
Yes. And I did a little research about why they chose the name Columbia, and apparently that was the code name used for America when the early settlers defied British law and started publishing the weekly debates of the British Parliament. So I love that that's what they chose for their studio name.
So they introduced a new logo in 1928. And it's not that we'll necessarily recognize it, but it has some of the elements of the torch lady that we're talking about now.
It almost looked like a Roman warrior. It wasn't so elegant and regal, but it was a woman that you would probably see in the battlefield. She's holding a shield instead of her torch. She's definitely holding something, I'm not even sure what it is, in her other hand, but she looks like she's ready for battle.
It looks like an olive branch.
Yeah, maybe it is.
Yeah.
Maybe it's symbolic of that.
Right.
But that was the first incarnation of this image.
And that was used from 1924 to 28.
So the next incarnation of the Columbia logo happens in 1928, and this is when they give us the first look at the real torch lady. She's got this stylish headdress, she holds her torch high, and in this version, the light from her torch actually flickers. And for the first time, the Columbia Pictures name appears above her.
They're getting real fancy
They're
now.
getting very, very fancy. And they used this logo from 1928 until 1936.
Okay.
And then they changed again.
Okay, and then 36, it changes again, and it's what most classic film fans know and love. So gone is her headdress and the flickering rays of light from her torch, and there are some dramatic clouds added.
Makes a big difference.
Yes, and she stands on a pedestal.
As she should.
Yes, yes. And this was actually used by the studio all the way into 1976.
Yes, and I think this is the version that most people are familiar with. It's sort of the iconic classic. And instead of Columbia Productions, it now just says in big, bold letters, Columbia behind her.
Right,
which is
right.
nice. As color gets introduced into the film world, Columbia introduced a slightly different torch lady in 1961. Not only was she in color, she was widescreen too.
Ooh.
So they're getting fancy with the torch lady. The only real changes here were the clouds. The torch lady stayed virtually the same, but the clouds changed a little bit, and this color version was used from 1961 to 1976 for all color movies.
Okay.
I can just hear her asking, does this widescreen make my torch look fat?
Oh, that's funny.
So then in 76, they're trying to mix things up again. They kept the torch lady, the iconic figure, right?
Yes.
But her features are less defined. They seem more generic. And when showing the logo, they kind of start on the torch lady and then they zoom into the rays of her torch. And it turns into this hipper, more minimalistic Columbia Pictures logo, right?
Yes,
So-
which I did not like this incarnation, I have to say, because just the fact that you lose a lot of the features of her face, she becomes very generic. And
Right.
I didn't like the whole moving around. I want my torch lady pure.
Yes. Well, apparently somebody there didn't like it either because in 4 years they changed it again, 4 or 5 years.
As they should,
Yeah.
yes. Yeah, that one did not last long.
And this one, I'm not crazy about this one, quite frankly. This one moves into a traditional...
Well, this was the 80s, right?
Yeah, this is the 80s.
Yeah, everything was bad in the 80s.
Everything was bad in the 80s, including the Columbia Pictures logo.
Yes, I didn't like this one either. Because again, her features were still very generic and her face lacked detail.
Right.
Which you had so beautifully on the early incarnations of this.
But her pedestal does get fancier, right?
Yes, they upgrade the pedestal, but not her.
So that's from 81 to 92. And then in 1992, Columbia decides to shake things up again with New Orleans artist Michael J. Diaz. Now, he was hired to create a matte painting that would then be digitized as the new logo for the studio. And he was pretty famous. I mean, he had done images of James Dean, Marilyn Monroe, Humphrey Bogart, Cary Grant for the official U.S. postage stamp image. And Diaz decides to get an actual model in the person of Jenny Joseph, who worked for the local New Orleans newspaper. So she becomes the model for the Torch Lady.
Yes. And I love that she wasn't even really a model. She
Yeah.
was just this woman that worked at the newspaper, but apparently he just liked her look. He thought she had this regal elegance to her that he thought fit what you wanted your Torch Lady to look like.
Right. And she is interviewed in 2013 as saying that she would just go over there at lunchtime and they'd wrap a sheet around her and she'd hold a little desk lamp and get up on the little platform and he would draw her.
Yes, in Jenny Joseph's version, the color schemes changes a little bit, and the face of the Torch Lady is much more detailed again. So they brought back the details of the face, which I loved. But this time she's no longer holding an American flag.
Yeah.
And apparently the artist, Diaz, was told not to use the flag. Specifically. He wasn't sure if it was for legal reasons or a trademark issue or what.
Okay.
So this version in 1992 no longer has the flag. And this is the version that we still see today.
Okay. So we know that Jenny Joseph is the current model for the Torch Lady, but we haven't talked about who were the people before that and all those other iterations.
I know. And it's such a complicated question because there's so many women who either claim to be the model for the Columbia Torch Lady. Some,
You know I was.
It was me. And I kind of love diving into that a little bit. Who were the women that were the contenders? Who do we think really posed for it? We may never know, but the ladies involved are fascinating.
So the first one is a woman by the name of Claudia Dell. And we know that she might have been because of Betty Davis's biography, right? In
Yes.
1962, she talks about Claudia Dell being used as the Columbia Pictures signature for years.
Yes, there's certainly some credence to that. Betty Davis says it. And from what I understand, during that era, the studio had a lot of different women come in and put on the toga, hold the torch, and be photographed.
Okay.
So there's a question of whether one woman was used or if it was
an
a
amalgamation.
compilation of all these women. But Claudia Dell was believed to have been possibly the one that was used for the final version of the Columbia Torch Lady.
And she was an actress.
She actually was an actress. She came from Broadway. I think she did Ziegfeld Follies in 1927. She came to Hollywood. She's been in lots of kind of B movies. Like at Universal, she was Tom Mix's leading lady in Destiny Rides Again. And, then she ended up getting in some bigger movies like Algiers with Charles Boyer and Hedy Lamarr, but never had a huge career. She moved to radio in the 1950s. She was under contract with Howard Hughes' organization, RKO. And she appeared in many Lux radio theater programs. And she also had her own television show in New York later on in her career, Leave It to the Girls.
Okay.
So she did have a legitimate career. She just wasn't a star.
So whether it's her or perhaps it's another woman by the name of Amelia Batchelor. Now, Amelia Batchelor was interviewed by People magazine in 1987. And if it's in People magazine...
Oh, it's the God's honest truth.
Right? So she is a Texas-born model, and she was a bit player for Columbia. And she claims to have been the model for the logo.
Yes. And again, I think she was one of those women that they called in. And I think there's a quote of her saying, I think in 1935 or 36, I was a stock contract player, and for $75 a week, we did everything but sweep the floors. We posed for this and for that, and we did bit parts, sometimes in 2 or 3 pictures a day. Jobs were very hard to get, and $75 was a lot of money then. And when you could buy a loaf of bread for 10 cents. Anyway, I didn't mind posing. I'd won a beauty contest in Dallas, and my one and only ambition was to be discovered.
Okay.
And so she was one of those contract players brought in and photographed as the Torch Lady.
Now, there's also a woman by the name of Jane Bartholomew. She worked as an extra at Columbia in the 30s, could have been this same time period.
Yes.
Served as a model. She was discovered by Columbia Pictures head honcho Harry Cohn, and she doesn't have any screen credits that we can find.
Yes.
She was mainly a background player, but she did appear on the Mike Douglas show in 1977 talking about posing for the Torch Lady logo.
Yes, which makes you think she was probably just part of that group of women they called in. But she was convinced in this interview on Mike Douglas that the final image was hers.
Okay.
Which a lot of women have claimed, and no one's ever really said definitively who it was, but let these ladies think it was them.
Yeah. Another one, Evelyn Venable, right?
Yes.
She was quite an established actress.
Yeah, she was a very well-known actress, began in silence and worked her way into the talkies. She made lots of movies like Death Takes a Holiday, The Little Colonel with Shirley Temple. She's in Alice Adams with Katharine Hepburn. I mean, she has a real legit career. Another interesting thing about her is she served as the model and the voice for the Blue Fairy in Walt Disney's 1940 animated film Pinocchio.
Wow. She married cinematographer Hal Moore, two-time Oscar winner for Midsummer Night's Dream and The Phantom of the Opera. And she went back to teaching, right? She taught at UCLA and became a faculty member there. And I love that she taught ancient Greek and Latin and organized the production of Greek plays with the classics department.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
See, she used her skill sets for good.
Yes, exactly. In the 1990s, we've got another entry of who this might be. Somebody discovers some photos of a woman named Rose Edna Toriello. Now, she worked for Columbia in the 30s, correct?
Yes, she did. I think she was mostly an extra, but she did work there.
And the photos of her, she's draped in a toga and she's holding a torch. Ding, 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 ding. Maybe, right?
I know. So we have a late entry into the mystery of who was the Columbia Pictures Torch Lady.
Right. So her husband, James, is a photographer, and photographs were discovered of a shoot with his wife in the toga with the torch. And these photos, we think, are the original Columbia Pictures logo. In the 1990s, it was actually determined by photo imaging that Rose is, in fact, the person used in the original depiction. Science.
Mystery solved by
technology.
science.
All those women.
I love that. Well, I love the fact that there's all these women out there that think they were the Columbia Torch Lady. Some may have been, some might not have been. But here's my favorite urban legend about the mysterious Torch Lady.
Yes.
For years, it was rumored that renowned actress Annette Benning was the model for the logo that had been used since the 1990s.
Wow.
While she certainly does resemble the image of the current Torch Lady, but we all now know that that is Jenny Joseph's. All of these rumors survived for years that it was Annette Benning, but when she was still an unknown actress, that she was the one who posed for the photos. That rumor has since been debunked. But what I do love is when Annette did the movie What Planet Are You From in 2000, just as sort of an inside joke to this urban legend, when they pop up the Columbia logo, they superimpose Annette Benning's face over hers. Which is
very funny.
Nice. We may not ever really know who all these incarnations of the Torch Lady were. I think, as you said, they might have been a compilation of many photographs taken of several actresses.
Right.
But I just love that mystery still survives and that nobody really knows. And there's all these women that think it was them.
Yes. Well, before we talk about the MGM Lion and its origins, let's dive into this week's Hollywood Pop Quiz.
And the pop quiz today is, of course, we're talking about Hollywood studio logos. Another very famous Hollywood studio logo is the Mountain of Dreams from Paramount, which has stars that encircle the mountain. The question is, the mountain depicted in this logo, which mountain range is it?
All right. We will be back with the answer to that and more about studio logos after this.
Steve and Ann will be right back, but first another stop on the Hollywood tour. The Marx Brothers' whimsical first names were actually nicknames given to them by a good friend. It apparently happened during a card game. In his memoir, Groucho claims it was May of 1914. Then they were young vaudevillians, and the brothers were playing a backstage poker game somewhere in Galesburg, Illinois, where they had been performing. Well, a fellow vaudevillian, a guy named Art Fisher, had the fifth seat, and he dealt out a brand new hand bestowing nicknames as he went. Arthur Marx, who was a self-taught harpist, became Harpo. Leonard, who loved the ladies or chicks, became Chico. Milton's fondness for galoshes or gumshoes earned him the name Gummo, and Julius was dubbed Groucho, probably because of his dour demeanor. Herbert Marx, who was also known as Zeppo, might have had his name since around 1900. Say the secret word and earn a new nickname, huh? And now back to Steve and Ann from Beneath the Hollywood Sign.
Welcome back. And before we get any further into our next discussion about Leo the Lion from MGM, I just wanted to give a special shout out to our listener of the week. And it's a great old friend of mine who I just adore, and it's to Donna Langley Crosp, who has been such a supporter of our show since day one. She always gives us great feedback. She shares it. She likes everything. So she's been a great supporter of ours, and I just want to say thank you, Donna.
Yay, Donna!
Woohoo!
All right, jumping into MGM Lion. Now, the lion, as you know, when you walk around our house, the lion is kind of a mascot around our house. So
It is.
I loved getting to find out the history. Now, Howard Dietz was a publicist and director of advertising for Goldwyn Pictures and then later for MGM. And he is often credited with creating Leo the Lion, their lion mascot, and choosing their slogan.
Yes, which I love the story.
Yeah, I do too. He went to Columbia University, and the lion is a tribute to his alma mater because their mascot was the lion, and Dietz was most directly inspired by the university's fight song, Roar, Lion, Roar, which I love.
Exactly. And there were two lions that were part of Goldwyn's logo before they merged in 1924 with Marcus Lowe's Metro Pictures and Louis B. Mayer's company to make Metro Goldwyn Mayer. There's not a lot known about those first two lions. There's not a lot of history about them. There's very little known about them. But when MGM did come together as an entity, the very first lion they used in 1924 was a lion named Slats.
Yeah.
He was the very first one used at the new MGM. He was trained by Volney Pfeiffer. Slats was born in the Dublin Zoo on March 20th, 1919. And he was also used on all the black and white MGM films between 1924 and 1928. I think the very first film that used the logo with slats was a film called He Who Gets Slapped from 1924, which starred Lon Chaney, Norma Shearer, and John Gilbert. And unlike his successors, Slats did not roar. He just looked around.
Yeah.
He was the one and only lion that did not roar.
Yeah.
Which is how you can tell the difference.
I kind of like that. And the logo that surrounds the lion was created by an artist of the name of Lionel S. Rice, who was a painter from Poland. And he actually eventually went on to become an art director at Paramount, but he's the one that designed the ribbon.
Which is iconic, like kind of like a laurel,
Yes.
Well, the second lion they used after Slat is they used a lion named Jackie. Jackie was used from 1928 through 1956. He was born around 1915. He was this wild lion cub that was bought from the Nubian desert of Sudan and trained by Mel Kuntz. People probably know Mel Kuntz was a very well-regarded animal trainer back in the days of classic film. Well, Jackie was the first to roar. He roared 3 times before he looked off to the right of the screen. That was his trademark, 3 roars and look to the left.
I think, don't they say comedies in 3s? And, I think 3 roars is perfect.
Exactly. But in his early years of being the MGM Lion, from say 1928 to around 1933, there was a slightly extended version of Jackie as Leo the Lion, where after he looks off to the right, he would then turn his gaze right back to the middle and just stare you down.
Wow.
Which is interesting.
And I understand he also appeared in over 100 films.
Yes, besides just being the MGM mascot, he was in tons of movies. He was in a lot of the Tarzan movies with Johnny Weissmuller. There's a very famous publicity still, you can find it online, of Greta Garbo with a lion. And that is Jackie.
And Jackie.
You can tell that Greta is not so fond of Jackie.
Oh, yeah.
She looks so uncomfortable in these photos.
Yeah, I don't think you want to turn you back.
And also, if you really want to get a flavor of Jackie, there's an incredible movie on YouTube from 1933. It's a short, and it actually shows Mel Kuntz giving Jackie a bath. Oh. And it's incredible. Go check it out. You really get to see
sweet.
Jackie at her finest, or his finest. I'm not sure.
Yeah, it could be either way. Talk about having 9 lives. Wasn't Jackie nicknamed Leo the Lucky?
Jackie was indeed, and that is because Jackie survived several accidents, including 2 train wrecks, a sinking ship, the 1933 Long Beach earthquake, and an explosion at the studio. But most notably was Jackie survived a plane crash, which is crazy, this whole story. On September the 16th, I think it was 1927, Marty Jensen was hired to fly Jackie cross-country. I'm not sure why, but they installed behind the pilot seat this special cage that was enclosed so Jackie could fly cross-country.
Yeah, and the guy wouldn't worry about him biting his head off from behind.
So the plane took off near San Diego. However, the plane was overweight because Jackie weighed something like 350 pounds. So the excessive weight caused the plane to go down in the mountains near Payson, Arizona. Well, Jensen and Jackie survived the initial crash, but they weren't found for 4 days. So they had to survive on sandwiches and milk and water that they had on board the plane. Eventually they were found by rescuers, and Jackie was a little thinner, a little weaker, but was eventually returned to MGM and was, of course, well cared for by his handlers for the rest of his life.
Okay, so I just have to stop here for a second, because if I'm crashing in a plane and I'm left to fend for myself with a lion for 4 days, I'd be a little worried.
I know. Make sure that lion gets something to eat.
I know. God, I bet he gave him all the sandwiches.
I know.
Hey, you want this one? Yeah, go ahead.
Keep the lion in the cage. It's funny because in 1931, Jackie went on this big farewell tour across the country. By train, would go to city and city, and the kids would come out and see Jackie and say goodbye. He eventually retired to the Philadelphia Zoo. Jackie was reportedly at that point quite tame and really gentle and really liked people.
Yeah.
And on February the 25th, 1935, Jackie passed away very peacefully at the zoo.
Oh, that's so sweet.
Yeah.
Now, after Jackie, in 1927, and I'm sure there are film buffs out there that are listening, they know about this particular lion whose name was Bill.
Yes.
And apparently, I know it's a funny name for a lion.
Bill the Lion.
Bill the Lion, 1927 to around 1928. Apparently, it's rarely found in films today. There are just a few out there. So if you see Bill, say hi.
Because Bill was only used for a year, I think.
Yeah.
And, besides being the MGM lion for a tiny minute, he also was in a couple of movies, some silent color movies.
Okay.
One being Buffalo Bill's Last Fight from 1927, and that's how Bill got his name. It was from Buffalo Bill.
I see.
Which is fun.
Okay.
So, yeah, he was short-lived. And, there's another one that popped in around this time, too, in 1928. His name was Telly. He was also appeared on color MGM movies, whereas Jackie had all the black and white movies. They used Telly for some of the color movies. There's an extended version of the logo which features Telly, which appears in the beginning of the movie The Viking from 1928. I think that was his first time on camera.
And he's roaring.
And he roars. Everybody roared except for Slat. Yes.
Okay.
There's also films like The Mysterious Island from 1929. You can still see Telly. But in this version, he was in black and white only because the color version was lost. So they had a black and white print and a color print, which is why he got the gig, because he was sort of the color lion at the time.
Right, okay. Then they moved to a lion by the name of Coffee. Is that right?
Great name. I love that.
I know, Coffee. 1932 to 1935. Is there anything about Coffee that we should know?
Coffee also appeared in some shorts, but other than that, he was, again, short-lived. I think they were kind of filler lions until they moved on to Tanner, which was the next big lion at MGM.
Yes.
And like Jackie, Tanner was trained by Mel Kuntz, and he appeared on all Technicolor MGM films from 1934 to 1956, and also cartoons from 1935 to 58. And he basically replaced Telly and Coffee as the color MGM lion.
Right.
Tanner was MGM's third longest lion used. He had a total of 22 years tenure. Jackie was used for 28 years, and the current lion, which they call Leo, so far has been used for 67 years and counting.
That's amazing.
So those are the big three.
Yeah. Now there is one in between Tanner and Leo that's current today by the name of George. And what his claim to fame is, apparently he did have the shortest tenure, George, but he also had the heaviest mane.
Yes.
Which I found fascinating.
I know. I love that you can tell the difference by the size of the mane for each of the animals.
Right.
You know, and I know that George did appear in some pretty high-profile films. So if you ever watch High Society from 1956,
Yes.
or Lust for Life with Kirk Douglas, 56, or The Wings of Eagles, which we've talked about because my father was an extra in that movie.
Yeah.
The lion in that logo is George.
Wow.
And also Silk Stockings from 1957 as well.
So he wasn't there long, but he sure did make an impression.
He did. At least he got on some good movies.
Yeah. So the current logo that MGM is using was debuted March 8th, 2021. Leo, I hate this. He's now CGI animated.
Oh,
Come on, people.
I hate it. But Leo actually got started in 1957. He was the real lion. He was the only one actually named Leo, even though they called all of them Leo the Lion.
Yeah.
His name, he was the 8th, and he's still the current lion used for the logo. He was born in 1956, also in the Dublin Zoo, the same place where Slats was born.
I saw that, yeah, which that's interesting.
He was also one of the youngest lions at the time, and also, which kind of explains his smaller mane. Leo made his debut for the film Tip on a Dead Jockey. What a title.
Yeah, that's quite a title.
I know, which had a great cast. It was Robert Taylor and Dorothy Malone, but I don't know that movie. But that was his first film where he gets to be the MGM lion. But Leo was trained by a guy named Ralph Heffler, who was also a pretty well-known animal trainer back then. And also, instead of, in addition to being used as the MGM lion, he was also appeared in tons of movies like King of Kings, The Lion, Zebra in the Kitchen, Fluffy, and even Napoleon and Samantha.
Wow.
With Jodie Foster in
that's
72. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think there's a story that Jodie Foster tells on Scott Feinberg's podcast about that lion, and it is not good. But she went back and got back on the horse, so to speak, and, look at her now.
Yes.
Now, MGM unveiled an updated logo, still using Leo, on March 8th, 2021. But unfortunately, Leo is CGI animated.
Boo.
Now, it's based on the 1957 footage, but come on.
I know.
Really? Like, you're a film studio. Don't be doing that.
Exactly. You've got all this wonderful footage of these great lions. Use the real footage.
Yeah. The other thing that is disappointing about the new logo is that instead of having the Latin phrase ars gratia artis, art for art's sake, I guess they figure nobody knows Latin anymore. And so they put the actual art for art's sake, which
The dumbing of America.
it is kind of, I mean, I sort of just loved the old school Latin phrase. And
Yes.
yeah. So,
And
there's
you know
that.
what, on a final note, maybe on the whole Leo the Lion logo, I love that there were plays on Leo throughout the years. And one of my favorites was, of course, Mary Tyler Moore. When she
Yes.
formed her production company, MTM Enterprises, she used the same setup for Leo the Lion, but instead of a big ferocious lion, there's a little kitten that purrs or
love
meows.
it. I love it. As a kid, I remember seeing that and just thinking that was so charming.
Yeah, I thought, how clever. What a nice play on Leo.
Well, we didn't get a chance to talk about the Paramount Mountain in too much detail, but I think we can answer the pop quiz and maybe give a little bit of background on that.
Yes, we can. The question, of course, was in the Paramount Pictures logo, there's a very famous mountain depicted. What is the mountain range? The mountain range is...
Ben Lomond Peak.
Ah, you knew that.
I
Yes.
did.
Yes,
I
it
did.
is in Utah.
In Utah.
And that is because the creator of the logo grew up there and just had such an affinity for that mountain range that he used it in the Paramount logo. And of course, I think their slogan was Mountain of Dreams. Yes.
Right.
And also in the original logo, there's 24 stars around the mountains. There's a rumor that represents the first 24 actors who signed contracts
Paramount.
with Paramount. But then again, I've heard that's not the case. So we don't really know about the stars, whether it was just aesthetics or it actually represents the stars that were there. But it's since been cut down to 22. So 2 of those stars got cut.
And it was William Hodkinson who first designed the Paramount logo in 1914. Legend has it that he doodled an image of a star-crested mountain on a napkin during a meeting with Adolf Zukor.
Oh, that's fascinating. I love that.
Yeah. It was an image he remembered of a mountain peak from his childhood in Ogden, Utah.
So the next time you're watching an old movie and you see the logo of the studio pop up, just think there's a story behind that.
Exactly.
And maybe another episode will bring you more of these.
We would love it if you would follow us on social media. Our handle is @FromBeneathTheHollywood Sign, and we are located on Instagram, Facebook, and you can watch the podcast on YouTube.
And you can also email us at info@FromBeneathTheHollywoodSign.com.
That's this week's View.
From Beneath the Hollywood Sign.
You've been listening to From Beneath the Hollywood Sign with Steve Cubine and Nan McNamara, the podcast that celebrates amazing stories of Tinseltown from its golden era. Join us next week for another episode and learn something else about Hollywood you probably never knew. Take a moment and give us a 5-star rating and a positive review. And tell your friends about us too. It'll help grow the podcast. Visit Steve's website at FromBeneathTheHollywoodSign.com. The executive producers are Steve Cubine and Nan McNamara. Executive producer and post-production supervisor Lindsay Schnebley. This podcast is part of the Airwave Media Podcast Network. Visit airwavemedia.com to listen and subscribe to their other fine shows like The Box of Oddities and The Shallow End with Schnebley and Toth. Copyright 2024, all rights reserved. That's a wrap.